I am just now putting two and two together, Emily and Eliana. Susan Crabtree was on this show last night, as you point out, Emily. There's no better reporter on the Secret Service. This is her beat. She knows it all. And she told us about concerns that Iran may have infiltrated the Secret Service. She told us, I'm pulling up her article here from August 26th, which she referenced last night. Some U.S. national security officials are convinced that agencies devoted to protecting the security of presidents and other political leaders have been compromised by Iranian intel assets. Three knowledgeable sources told Real Clear Politics. A former senior intel official in the Obama administration told RCP, quote, "Our counterintelligence vigilance for our security protective services in the U.S., be it diplomatic security services, be it Secret Service, or the U.S. Marshals or in the Treasury Department, have been penetrated by people who are wittingly or unwittingly providing tangible support for Iranian network activities in this country." She went on to write, "It's unclear if employees in the U.S. protective agencies are knowingly participating or simply interacting with assets for the Tehran government." Now, that's interesting and could possibly be true. But she also went on to say that 2 years ago, some U.S. officials became alarmed about Secret Service leaders and their lack of vigilance because an applicant to the Secret Service failed the terrorism portion of the counterintelligence polygraph test. This is a guy auditioning for the Secret Service, applying for. They make you take a polygraph to make sure you're not a foreign spy. And this person failed that portion of the polygraph test, but agency leaders allowed the employee to remain and to become a security clearance adjudicator, someone who decides who will get security clearances. I feel like I'm on an episode of 24 where this is bizarre fiction that could never happen in real life. But I trust Susan Crabtree. Everything she reported about Butler turned out to be true, even though she had significant blowback from the agency, and they later wound up admitting it. So she's reporting that there's concern within the U.S. national security ranks about Iran infiltrating the Secret Service. A former senior official in the Obama administration said it has been penetrated by people who are either wittingly or unwittingly providing tangible support for Iran and a network of Iranians in this country, and somebody who failed the counterintelligence piece of the Secret Service polygraph test was nonetheless allowed to join the Secret Service and approve or disapprove security clearances. All right, so all of that brings me to this affidavit that we just looked at a moment ago, saying that this guy, unless he just dropped off his phone at 1:59 a.m. and just then came back to it 12 hours later, unlikely, he was likely attached to his phone and was lying in wait for 12 hours. How did the guy know that Donald Trump was going to be golfing there? Trump has two golf courses in this area. He's got one at Mar-a-Lago, which is Palm Beach, and he's got this one, Trump International, at West Palm Beach, which is a stone's throw away. It's very close. So how did this guy, if Trump just made up his mind on Sunday morning to go golfing, how did he know that he was going to go to Trump International versus Mar-a-Lago, which is where Trump stays when he's down there? He stays in the resort connected with that golf course. He couldn't have known in advance if Trump made this decision spur of the moment. He couldn't have known in advance unless someone around Trump told him that Trump had maybe mentioned the night before he might do it, that he was thinking about going to Trump International. How would you know? It could have been a complete crapshoot. The guy could have said, I got a 50-50 shot. I'm from Hawaii. I don't live here. I know he loves to golf and he's down in Florida. He could have said that and just taken a chance. I'm going to put the money on red and go to Trump International and lie here and wait for 12 hours. And maybe I'll do the other golf course the next weekend. I don't know. But it does occur to me that if you had somebody who was close to Trump and heard Trump say something like, I think I'm going to go to international tomorrow, That's exactly the kind of thing that could be leaked. I realize this sounds very conspiratorial. It's by definition very speculative. But guys, I don't understand how even the Susan Crabtree piece of this alone was allowed, Eliana. How is that allowed when it is Iran that's making open death threats against our president right now, our former president?
If that's true, it's mind-blowing, very concerning, and merits deep investigation by Congress, of course. But what we do know for certain is that Iran is engaged in very serious efforts to undermine the Trump campaign and to prevent his election. And they have succeeded in hacking the email of a Trump ally, I believe it was Roger Stone's email, in an attempt to undermine his election prospects. And so they are trying to disrupt the president's efforts at re-election and have succeeded to a certain extent. And I will say we've heard, compared to what we heard about Russia's attempts in 2016 to aid the Trump campaign, we've heard a whole lot less about Iran's attempts to undermine the Trump campaign, because I think it's a narrative that is unhelpful to Kamala Harris, that Iran does not want her opponent elected president. They would rather have her. And it's one that the mainstream media does not particularly want to talk about. To the other topic you raised, Megyn, about how did this person know Trump would be there?
Let me just correct myself here before you make your point, because my team corrected me that Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach doesn't have the golf course, that the golf course is this one at Trump International. So if he's at Mar-a-Lago, he's likely using this golf course. So that deduction would be rather easy. His other two are in Jupiter, Florida, and then there's another one, I think, in Miami. So
Doral.
Doral. So that would explain, if he knew Trump was at Mar-a-Lago, the likelihood of, if he's golfing, would be at this particular golf course, which is an important fact to know. Sorry, keep going. I don't know if that changes what you were going to say.
Well, to your second point about, is there a leak? Is there an agent inside the Trump campaign? Certainly you'd have to think that they're rattled, given that Trump made a last-minute decision and Ryan Routh had been waiting for 12 hours. Look, if I were a former president, I'd be shaken and quite nervous about that. And you have to think that law enforcement officials are asking them these questions. This should obviously be a part of their investigation, and that those who had contact with Trump would be talking about, when did he disclose, when did he say he wanted to play golf? To whom was that communicated? Who knew about this? In what order? I have to assume this is being looked into.
Who knew? The Jupiter golf course, though, is only 19 miles away. And he does golf at Jupiter. I've mentioned before on the show, I know a kid who is a great golfer, and he plays at the Jupiter Trump golf course, and he sees Trump there all the time. And Trump, it goes there from Mar-a-Lago. So my original point stands. Mar-a-Lago doesn't have a golf course attached to it, but you could go to Jupiter or you could go to Trump International. How did this guy know? How did he place the right bet that Trump was going to golf and that he was going to be at this golf course? We're going to have to learn more about exactly when Trump decided to go there. I'm sure they're asking him exactly when he decided to go there and who he told. I'm sure there's a whole protocol around all of this. But this is just deeply disturbing, Emily. I don't have faith in the FBI. I share Eric Trump's skepticism about them, and yet they've seized control of the investigation. And it's going to be very hard, no matter what Ron DeSantis does, for Ron DeSantis to have an independent jurisdiction on this, because these will be federal charges and the feds will be in charge.
Well, and as much as, some of Trump's opponents may not want to admit it, the FBI, in retrospect, was very, very clearly involved in the Russia collusion investigation. And that's just one thing. So if we put it there, the Russia collusion building that narrative out, because, in the words of Peter Strzok, they wanted an insurance policy. And so the idea that just facially Trump supporters in this country or nonpartisan people in this country would trust the FBI to now do a thorough and objective investigation here. Whether or not they actually are capable of doing it is a different question. How can you expect the American people, especially Trump supporters, to trust them to do the investigation? I mean, I think that is very, very obvious, which is why Ron DeSantis stepped into the gap. I think that's both politically good for him, obviously, but I think it's actually just going to be helpful on the question of substance, period. It's just, the actual plot, the Iranian assassination plot against the president, combined with all of Susan's reporting there, which we are hearing very little of in some of these massive legacy outlets that have lots of sourcing in these agencies, is incredibly, incredibly important, because this man, the suspect, the man who was apprehended, who left that rifle on the scene along with backpacks and a scope and a GoPro, and it may turn out that he was staking out the Jupiter course, and maybe he had been doing this for a long time. We don't know. That those questions are also really important. But he was actively, publicly seeking to make contacts with foreign governments. And that's where you can imagine potentially, and we have no idea, but potentially the Iranians and Iranian intelligence looking at this crazy man who had published an ebook suggesting that Iran assassinate Trump, which, who knows, finding that would have been like a needle in the haystack for them. But what they could have seen is this man tweeting repeatedly at foreign governments, going to Kyiv, saying publicly he was going to Kyiv, going to Taiwan, saying publicly in recent months that he had been to Taiwan. And I just want to read a tweet from Sean Van Diver, who is the head of the Afghan evacuation coalition effort. And he said, when this guy's idiotic plan, referring to Routh, made it to Afghan evac, our response was strong. My guidance was to stay the F away from him, that we weren't going to ask Afghans to go fight in this war. They've already done enough and have earned their spot in our country. So just what that means is this guy was known enough among the people who are in these kind of NGO spaces, working in foreign military conflicts, that he was on their radar and was a known crazy person.
Let me just add to that, Emily. Let me just add to that. He was, there's zero question he would have been on their radar, because, not to get too in the weeds, I want the audience to continue following us, but the New York Times interviewed this guy, this shooter, Ryan Routh, a year ago, because he was trying to organize foreign fighters to go fight in Ukraine in what appears to have been some haphazard, hapless attempt to help the Ukrainians win the war. And the New York Times spoke with him. And now the reporter who spoke with him is speaking out about how that came about. And he said in the New York Times today, this is how I found him and why I found him. I was put in touch with Mr. Routh through an old colleague and friend from Kabul, Najim Rahim. Through the strange nexus of combatants, as one war ended and another began, speaking of Afghanistan ending and Ukraine beginning, this guy, his friend from Kabul, had learned of Mr. Routh from a source of his in Iran. A source of his in Iran. So the guy in Afghanistan has a source in Iran who knows of Mr. Routh. And the source in Iran is former Afghan special ops soldier who was trying to get out of Iran and fight in Ukraine. So you have a former Afghani guy, soldier, wanting to get out of Iran and go fight in Ukraine. And this guy speaks to the New York Times and says, you should interview this guy, Routh. He's trying to get people like me out of Iran and elsewhere to go fight in Ukraine. So that doesn't mean that the Iranians spoke to Routh, but it does certainly suggest they would have known about him. If it's to the point where you've got Afghan soldiers in Iran contacting New York Times reporters to say, call this guy, he's pulling people out of Iran right now to go fight in Ukraine, there seems to be little question that the Iranians would know of him. I am not blaming this assassination attempt on Iran, just connecting some weird dots after the Susan Crabtree reporting and saying this needs to be thoroughly looked at. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, we saw actually stuff like this play out during the Cold War, and a lot of it we learned afterwards or years after it had happened. But you see a really vulnerable person who is super anti-Trump or super pro-Ukraine, super whatever it is. He was publicly insane. I read through all of his posts on X last night. He had like 500 something. I read through all of them, all of his replies. He was tweeting at Bono and all of these different, celebrities.
He wanted to buy a rocket from Elon.
Right. And he was trying to broker meetings with Kim Jong-un, and all of this ostensibly for the cause of peace, as he would have put it. But when you have someone who's doing that publicly and then is kind of known in the space, you could see how a foreign intelligence agency would look at that and say, this is somebody who could potentially be used. So not to go too far down that rabbit hole, but I do think in the context of Susan's reporting here, those questions are absolutely critical. In addition to, I mean, we know that there was an Iranian assassination plot that was recently foiled against Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So you put all of that together. I mean, there's
that's
that
a big
too.
one. That's a big point to mention in the context of this discussion. It's possible. That's all we know at this hour. Imagine waking up one day to find out your home no longer belongs to you, that someone somewhere has stolen your property right out from under you. It sounds unthinkable, but it is a sad reality for some American homeowners and a risk for anyone that owns property. House stealing, that's what the FBI calls it. And it's a form of real estate fraud where scammers leverage loopholes in the system to fraudulently transfer your home's title into their name, then take out loans against your property or even sell it behind your back. And by the time you find this out, the scammer's long gone, leaving you, the legitimate homeowner, to clean up the mess. But right now, triple lock protection is available through HomeTitleLock.com, offering 24/7 title monitoring, alerts, and restoration services. You can sign up today at HomeTitleLock.com and use the promo code Megyn for 30 days of protection for free and a comprehensive title scan to make sure that you're not already a victim of this kind of thing. It's promo code Megyn and HomeTitleLock.com or just by using the link below. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.